put that whammy on. Passed off near side Secor, tried to draw it around, couldn't, and down on the ice. Stevens. Oh my goodness.
This would be a defining moment in Paul Kariya's illustrious career. Before this hit took place, the Anaheim Ducks were desperately fighting for their playoff lives. Led by Kariya and on the back of a red-hot Jean-Sebastien Giguère, the Ducks needed to not only win Game 6, but to also win in a pivotal Game 7. The man who committed the hit was Scott Stevens, who is known for his physical nature and booming hits, and his blindside hit on Kariya left a lasting impact in more ways than one. When Kariya got hit, he immediately collapsed on impact, lying on the ice for a little over a minute. Sports journalist Michael Farber told TSN, quote, "I thought he was dead. Honest to goodness, or could have been dead. He didn't breathe, and most people in the Honda Center didn't breathe as well, as there was that fear." Thankfully, Kariya would take a deep breath and would be taken to the dressing room immediately, and it looked like he wouldn't be returning, possibly for the remainder of the series. But to everyone's surprise, minutes later, Paul Kariya would return, cementing himself in hockey history. The fans erupted as Paul Kariya would eventually net the game winner, making a shocking return to the ice, helping keep the Ducks' Stanley Cup hopes alive. Unfortunately, however, Game 7 was a different story, as the Devils would win and take home the Stanley Cup. The Kariya incident is even scarier when you look at what was revealed years later, as apparently, Kariya has no recollection of Game 6, 7, or his miraculous goal, as he would suffer from a concussion thanks to the hit, which would eventually lead to more injury problems throughout the remainder of his career. Many say hockey is one of the most toughest sports, mainly due to how much the players have to endure on a nightly basis, but it's also because of the players themselves, as Kariya and the rest of the players in today's video all showcase just how far players are willing to push their bodies in order to help their teammates. Before there was Paul Kariya's memorable moment, there was another moment very similar that occurred back in 1964, which all happened thanks to one shot. Maple Leafs defenseman Bobby Baun would leave the ice in a scene unlike no other. Similar to Kariya, this was a pivotal game for the Maple Leafs, as they were trailing the Red Wings 3-2 in the Stanley Cup Final and needed to win out in order to win it all. But for the Leafs, there was a bit more on the line. In 1962 and 1963, Toronto would take home the Stanley Cup. Winning this series meant getting to 3-peat, officially becoming a dynasty. Knowing someone had to make a play, Bobby Baun sacrificed his body to block a shot from none other than Gordie Howe, who notoriously possessed a hammer of a shot. And this was proven as Baun would have his ankle completely shattered, causing him to leave the game. But not for long. Eventually, the Leafs would tie the game and force overtime. And to everyone's surprise, Baun would re-enter the game, getting an opportunity to play the hero.
Off the boards, Bob Baun lets it drive, it goes, scores! Bob Baun, let it go, it bounced in front and went into the net.
Baun's goal would bring the series to a 7th game, and inspired by Bobby's bravery, the team rallied around him, dominating in a 4-0 Game 7 victory, taking home their 3rd straight Stanley Cup. Some say that Baun knew what happened to his knee that night, but Baun says it best in his famous post-game interview, stating,
"I blocked a shot in front of the net during killing the penalty, and it was numb then, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then when I went into the face-off with Gordie Howe, I just heard a snap, and it caved in underneath me. And I tried to get up, and there's no way I could put any weight on it. So that was the story then, and they froze my leg then, and it's all right now." of course.
Although his heroics tend to be forgotten about, his aren't the only one, as in 2002, it took everything he had for Red Wings captain Steve Yzerman to even stand up. When you hear what Steve Yzerman had to endure during the 2002 Stanley Cup run, it'll blow you away. But even before the Cup run began, Yzerman was experiencing excruciating pain. During training camp of that season, Yzerman's chronic knee pain would worsen, and with the Stanley Cup and his teammates in mind, Yzerman made the bold decision to sit out the remainder of the regular season after helping Team Canada take home gold for the first time in 50 years. Luckily, his Red Wings would make the playoffs despite losing their captain, and this was due to their insane amount of talent stacked on that year's roster, with names such as Brett Hull, Luc Robitaille, and a very young Datsuk being new additions. When Stevie Y returned, however, many hoped his knee would be better, but he was still in a lot of pain and had to essentially play the entire playoffs on one leg. Now, this is Steve Yzerman. He's not gonna let a bad knee get in the way of his on-ice play, right? Well, let's just let the numbers speak for themselves. 23 points in 23 games. Yzerman would lead the team in points, taking home the Stanley Cup on one leg. It was said that things were so bad for him that when taking a fall, he would have to lean all of his weight on his stick in order for him to get up. That's how great of a leader Steve Yzerman really was. He was willing to put everything on the line for his teammates, and it paid off, making him a legend in more ways than one. He would get a knee realignment surgery during that off-season, forcing him to miss the first 66 games of the following year. But it was well worth it, as Yzerman brought the cup back to Hockeytown once again. When talking about dominant playoff performances in recent memory, one name has to come to mind. Back in 2017, Erik Karlsson was the best defenseman in the entire NHL, who displayed phenomenal speed and agility, as well as outstanding offensive upside, all while averaging almost 28 minutes a night. During the regular season, Karlsson once again would impress. Producing 71 points in 77 games, he looked well on his way to a third Norris Trophy. But Karlsson had a different trophy in mind. One of the biggest knocks people would give on Karlsson was that although he was extremely good, he's never had great postseason success, and they were kinda right, as the last time the Senators went on a deep playoff run was way back in 2007. So when Erik's Senators would clinch a playoff spot, he was determined to make a run, taking matters into his own hands. The Senators would make it all the way to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals, going up against the defending champion Pittsburgh Penguins, and we all know how things would turn out. But we're talking about Karlsson, and in 19 playoff games, he would produce 18 points. Now, when looking at these numbers, many would be impressed, especially considering that these came from a defenseman. But now, look at these numbers being put up by a defenseman on one foot. Karlsson's previously had issues with injuries and still does to this day, but to arguably carry a Senators team to a Game 7 overtime, being one goal away from making it to the final on one foot and a fractured ankle is absolutely insane, especially when you see just how dominant he looked throughout the entire playoffs, because at first glance, he looked completely normal. Karlsson did his best to make it look like nothing ever happened, risking it all trying to help out his teammates, and back in 1994, another player went to drastic extremes in order to play on, that being Trevor Linden, whose drive to continue playing inspired the entire locker room. In 1994, Linden's Canucks would make a run all the way to the Stanley Cup final, and all throughout the playoffs, Linden would lead the way, finishing the postseason with a team-high 23 points. But as former teammate Cliff Ronning tells us, it wasn't easy for the captain at all. In an article from 2008, Ronning revealed, quote, "You don't know this, but Trevor Linden had cracked ribs and torn rib cartilage for the last 4 games of the 1994 Stanley Cup final." He also mentioned that Linden tried to act as if nothing ever happened, stating, "You can't imagine what it's like to hear your captain in a room down the hall screaming at the top of his lungs as they inject a needle into his rib cage. He would then walk into our dressing room like nothing had happened. Now, fast forward to Game 6. Lyndon is on the ice and in excruciating pain. Ronning recalls Lyndon having to literally crawl back to Vancouver's bench after sustaining some nasty hits, those being in the final seconds of Game 6. But despite going down, everyone knew he'd somehow be back, and the footage says it all.
There is going to be that 7th game. We'll hope they can catch Lyndon up and get him in that one. He will play. You know he'll play.
Lyndon would in fact play in Game 7 and put on a show, scoring 2 goals, trying to desperately get Vancouver back in front. Unfortunately, however, most know how things turn out. The Rangers would win their first cup since 1940, and a photo captured during the aftermath perfectly summarizes the amount of pain everyone was put through throughout the 94 run, as the pure exhaustion on Kirk McLean and Trevor Lyndon's faces speaks volumes. For the last part of today's video, we need to go back to 2013, as that year's playoffs was brutal to one team, that being the Boston Bruins, as 2 players in particular put everything on the line to try to win it all. First, let's head to the Eastern Conference Finals, where the Bruins would face off against the Pittsburgh Penguins. With the game being tied at 1, Penguins of Evgeny Malkin would take a slap shot that would be blocked by Bruins defenseman Gregory Campbell, and the Penguins wouldn't score on the power play, but when Campbell blocked Gino's shot, it would break his fibula, and instead of heading immediately to the bench, Campbell stuck it out, continuing to get in the middle of passing lanes. Finally, after a minute of continuing to play through an intense amount of pain, he would be able to head to the bench, and his teammates and coaches had nothing but positive things to say, as Campbell showed an intense amount of strength. But then, fast forward to the Stanley Cup Final, as the final 3 games in the series weren't too kind to Bruins captain Patrice Bergeron. In Game 4, he would suffer from a torn rib cartilage injury, but still decided to stick it out. The following game, however, he would have to be removed during the second period, as he would get hurt once again. The doctors believed he had a ruptured spleen, but in reality, he suffered from cracked ribs. But similar to Trevor Lyndon, Bergeron continued to keep on playing, and in Game 6, Bergeron would once again wear down his body, separating his shoulder and puncturing his lungs, as one of his cracked ribs would cause it to collapse. Luckily for Bergeron, the Bruins would choke away a 2-1 lead in the final minute of a must-win Game 6, making Bergeron go through all that pain for nothing. He would have to return to the hospital once again after the series was over. What makes this even more bizarre is that Bergeron handled the pain like a champ, as most of his teammates had no clue Patrice was going through any pain, and neither did the fans, until he publicly announced it himself after all was said and done. Hockey players are absolute warriors, who sacrifice everything for their teammates, coaches, and for a shot at the cup, and many have shown immense respect for those willing to put everything on the line despite suffering a ton of pain. Bergeron and everyone in today's video showcase just how much one is willing to persevere through in order to keep on playing, which is what makes hockey one of the greatest sports in the world.